This story contains themes of mystery, psychological suspense, and potentially unsettling discoveries. Listener discretion is advised. It started, as so many strange things do, with a simple, ordinary task. For Michael Campbell, it was cleaning out his Uncle Robert's cluttered apartment. Robert Jenkins had passed away quietly in his sleep, a man of routine and few surprises, or so everyone thought. Michael, his only surviving relative, had been tasked with the unenviable job of sifting through decades of accumulated life. He wasn't expecting anything of value, just old books, mismatched socks, and perhaps a few forgotten coins. Robert had been a creature of habit, living frugally, his life an open book of predictable chapters. There was no hidden past, no grand secrets, certainly no thrilling adventures. Or so Michael believed. 3 weeks into the process, amidst a mountain of tax documents from the 1980s and a collection of antique fishing lures, Michael found it. Tucked inside a worn leather-bound copy of an obscure history text, a book Robert had apparently never even opened, lay a small, heavy brass key. It was unlike any key Michael had ever seen. Its metal tarnished with age, smooth and cool to the touch. Etched into its head, not a number but a stylized, almost archaic symbol. A swirling pattern that seemed to curve back on itself like an endless knot. Alongside it, a single folded slip of paper, brittle and yellowed with time. It was typewritten, the ink faded but still legible. Sterling Trust Bank. Box 713. That was it. 2 lines. No name, no date, no additional instructions. Just the bank and the box number. Michael frowned, turning the key over in his palm. Sterling Trust Bank. He knew the name, a reputable, if somewhat old-fashioned, institution with several branches across the state. But Robert had banked with the same small, local credit union for 50 years. He boasted about it. Loyalty, he'd called it. The idea of him having an account, let alone a safe deposit box at a large corporate bank like Sterling Trust, was completely out of character. It was like finding a secret stash of gourmet caviar in the pantry of a man who ate kin soup every night. He shrugged it off initially. Probably some old forgotten thing. Maybe a mistake. Robert wasn't exactly known for his organizational skills. But the sheer weight of the key, the deliberate placement in the hidden book, gnawed at him. It felt important. More than that, it felt deliberate. He decided to make a quick call to Sterling Trust, just to clear it up. It would be a 5-minute distraction, nothing more. He dialed the customer service line, navigating the automated menus until he finally reached a human voice, polite and professional. Sterling Trust Bank, how may I help you? Hi, Michael said. My name is Michael Campbell. My uncle Robert Jenkins recently passed away. I'm the executor of his estate. I found a key and a note for a safe deposit box, number 713 at your bank. I was hoping to verify the account. A brief pause. One moment, sir, while I check that for you. Michael waited, idly tracing the symbol on the key with his thumb. He expected a quick confirmation, perhaps a note about past due fees, or instructions on how to proceed with a deceased account holder. What he got instead was a prolonged silence, followed by a slightly different voice. Mr. Campbell, my name is Sarah. I'm a supervisor here. I've checked our records thoroughly. We have no safe deposit box registered under the name Robert Jenkins. Furthermore, her voice took on a cautious, almost hesitant tone. The box number 713, that's not a valid format for our safe deposit boxes. Our system uses a 4-digit numerical sequence, often prefixed with the letter. 713 is simply not in our system. Michael felt a prickle of unease. Are you sure? It's a very old key, an old slip of paper. Maybe it's a legacy account? Something from decades ago. We've digitized all our records, Mr. Campbell, Sarah replied, her voice firm now. Every box, past and present, is in our database. There is no box 713. There has never been a box 713 at any Sterling Trust Bank location, and certainly not under the name Robert Jenkins. Michael's stomach tightened. This wasn't just a clerical error. This was a complete and utter denial of existence. He pulled out the slip of paper and the key again. But it clearly says Sterling Trust Bank and box 713. And I have this key. He described the key, the heavy brass, the peculiar symbol. I understand your confusion, sir, Sarah said, her voice softening slightly, but maintaining an unshakable resolve. But I can assure you with absolute certainty, that this box does not exist within our institution. Perhaps it's for a different bank? Or perhaps it's a memento, a prop, or even a misunderstanding. A memento? A prop? Michael felt a cold knot forming in his chest. Robert was meticulous, if sometimes disorganized. He didn't play elaborate jokes. He certainly didn't leave behind cryptic clues to non-existent bank accounts. And the way the key had been hidden, the deliberate, almost sacred way it had been placed inside that unread book. No, this wasn't a joke. This was something else entirely. He thanked Sarah, his mind racing, and hung up the phone. He sat there, the key and the slip of paper on the table before him, staring at them as if they might suddenly explain themselves. The initial frustration had morphed into something far more unsettling. If Sterling Trust Bank, a large, well-established institution, had no record of this box, then it shouldn't exist. Yet, here was the physical evidence, a key, a number, a bank name, a tangible object pointing to an impossible reality. He tried another approach. He drove to the nearest Sterling Trust Bank branch, the same one Robert's apartment was closest to. He approached the teller, a young woman named Emily, and repeated his story. Emily, after a quick consultation with a manager, returned with the same bewildered look. "Sir, we've checked. There's no box 713. Our system simply doesn't recognize that number format. And no Robert Jenkins." Michael felt a strange mix of disbelief and an almost primal fear beginning to stir within him. This wasn't just a dead end. It was a wall that shouldn't be there. A physical, undeniable key that opened a door to nowhere. He asked to see the safe deposit box vault, explaining he just wanted to understand the numbering system, to see if there was any chance of a misinterpretation. The manager, a man named David, politely but firmly declined, citing security protocols. "We can't just let anyone into the vault, sir. Especially without a valid box number or account." As Michael left the bank, the afternoon sun felt less warm, the bustling street less inviting. The air seemed to carry a new weight. This wasn't just a mystery. It was an anomaly. Paradox. A safe deposit box that, by all accounts, simply should not exist. He went back to Robert's apartment, the silence now feeling oppressive. He looked at the book where the key had been hidden, a heavy tome on ancient Mesopotamian history. He opened it again, flipping through the pages, but there was nothing else. No other notes, no hidden compartments, just the dry academic text. And then a thought struck him. The symbol on the key. He'd described it to Sarah, but she hadn't recognized it. Maybe it wasn't a random design. Maybe it was a clue. He pulled out his phone and snapped a picture of the key, then another of the faded slip of paper. He spent the rest of the evening cross-referencing the symbol online. He typed in ancient symbols, archaic banking symbols, symbols on old keys. Nothing. It was unique, or at least obscure enough to evade a quick internet search. The more he searched, the more the impossible truth settled in. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a joke. This was an intentional obfuscation. Someone, presumably Robert, had gone to great lengths to hide this key and its accompanying impossible instruction. But why? And what could be inside a box that literally did not exist? The questions spiraled in Michael's mind, each one more unsettling than the last. Was Robert living a double life? Did he have secrets so profound they required a non-existent safe deposit box? The man Michael knew was a creature of habit, a lover of routine, a quiet soul who spent his evenings watching documentaries about train travel. The idea of him orchestrating such an elaborate, almost fantastical mystery was absurd. Yet the key was real. The note was real. The bank's denial was real. He felt a growing sense of isolation. Who could he talk to about this? His friends would think he was losing his mind. The police? What would he even tell them? "I found a key to a bank box that doesn't exist." They'd laugh him out of the station. This was his burden, his impossible secret. The next morning, Michael woke with a start. The image of the key and the number 713 burned into his mind. He looked at his own reflection, a man who had, until yesterday, been perfectly content with his unremarkable life. Now he felt a strange, almost magnetic pull towards this mystery. He couldn't just throw the key away. He couldn't just forget about it. Robert, in his quiet, unassuming way, had dropped a bomb into Michael's ordinary existence. A bomb ticking with unknown secrets. He decided he couldn't rely on phone calls or polite inquiries. He had to dig deeper. If the bank wouldn't acknowledge the box, then he would have to find a way to make them. He had to understand what Box 713 truly meant, and why Robert Jenkins, a man of no apparent secrets, had left behind such a chilling, impossible enigma. Michael had no idea what he was walking into, or the dark, intricate web of deceit and danger that lay hidden beneath the surface of a seemingly mundane brass key. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had to find that box. He had to know what was inside, because the safe deposit box that shouldn't exist suddenly felt like the most important thing in his entire life. And the deeper he looked, the more he realized he wasn't just searching for answers, he was disturbing something that someone desperately wanted to keep hidden. The impossibility of a box that shouldn't exist suddenly felt like the most important thing in his entire life. And the deeper he looked, the more he realized he wasn't just searching for answers, he was disturbing something that someone desperately wanted to keep hidden. Michael left the bank in a daze, the sterile air of the vault still clinging to his imagination. The polite but firm refusal from the bank manager, a woman named Emily with an unyielding smile, echoed in his ears. No record, no account, no box 731. It was as if his grandfather, Arthur, had conjured it from thin air. But Arthur wasn't a man given to flights of fancy, especially not in his final lucid moments. He was a man of meticulous order, of ledgers and carefully filed documents. Back in his grandfather's quiet, dust-mote-filled study, Michael felt a tremor of frustration turn into a cold determination. He needed to retrace Arthur's steps, to find the origin of this phantom key. He pulled out the old wooden box again, the one that had held the key in the first place. He ran his fingers over its smooth, worn surface, examining every inch. Nothing, just a simple, unadorned box. He then turned his attention back to the stack of his grandfather's papers, the ones he'd already sorted through a dozen times, looking for anything he might have missed. Hours blurred into a single-minded obsession. He sifted through old tax returns, faded utility bills, insurance policies, and even Arthur's meticulously kept gardening notes. He was looking for an anomaly, a whisper of a clue. His eyes, now red-rimmed, scanned every date, every account number, every handwritten notation. He was about to give up, convinced he was chasing a ghost, when something caught his eye. Tucked away within a bundle of bank statements from the late 1980s, a statement from a different branch of the same bank, a branch that had closed years ago, he found it. It wasn't a direct reference to a safe deposit box. It was far more subtle. On the back of one of these old statements, almost completely faded, was a series of tiny handwritten numbers and letters, penned in Arthur's distinctive, elegant script. They weren't sequential, and they didn't resemble an account number. It looked like March 17th, 89 7:04:30 p.m. Below that, almost imperceptibly, was a single cryptic symbol, a stylized bird, perhaps an eagle with one wing slightly bent. Michael stared at it, his heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm. 7 Delta. Was it a code? A location? A different kind of box number? And the date, March 17th, 1989. What happened on that day? He tried to cross-reference it with Arthur's personal diary entries, but the diary for that year was unusually sparse, almost blank for the entire month of March. A deliberate omission? He knew he couldn't go back to the bank with this. G7 Delta would mean nothing to Emily, the bank manager. He needed context. He needed history. His next stop, he decided, had to be the local public library and historical society. They had archives, old city directories, microfiche records of ancient newspapers. Perhaps there, he could find something that connected Arthur, the bank, and that specific date. The library was a quiet sanctuary, the air thick with the scent of old paper and dust. Michael made his way to the local history section, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and dread. He found the microfiche readers and, after a brief interaction with an elderly archivist named Mrs. Henderson who seemed to know everything about everyone who had ever lived in town, he began his tedious search. He started with the local newspaper archives from March 1989. Hours passed as he scrolled through grainy headlines of local council meetings, high school sports scores, and community bake sales. Nothing. No major bank robberies, no unusual incidents reported at the local financial institutions. He expanded his search to include the entire month, then the surrounding months. Still nothing that jumped out. The silence of the library was punctuated only by the whirring of the microfiche machine, and the occasional rustle of pages. Just as he was about to give up on the newspapers, he decided to search for any mention of the specific bank branch Arthur had used, the one whose statement held the cryptic message. He typed in the bank's name and the year 1989. A few articles popped up, mostly routine financial news. But one headline, small and tucked away on an inside page from March 20, 1989, caught his attention. Local bank teller resigns abruptly. It wasn't front-page news, just a brief paragraph. A young teller, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, had resigned without notice, citing personal reasons. The article mentioned her 10 years of service and expressed the bank's regret at her sudden departure. Sarah Jenkins. Was there a connection? A sudden resignation just days after the date on Arthur's note. Michael felt a tremor of excitement, a thread finally emerging from the tangled yarn. He jotted down her name and the date. He tried searching for Sarah Jenkins in later newspaper editions, but found no further mention of her. It was as if she had simply vanished after leaving the bank. As he leaned back from the microfiche reader, rubbing his tired eyes, he felt a strange prickle on the back of his neck, a familiar sensation of being watched. He slowly scanned the quiet library. Across the room, nestled between shelves of historical fiction, a man was pretending to read a book, but his gaze seemed to be fixed on Michael. The man was nondescript, wearing a plain gray jacket, his face partially obscured by the book. As Michael met his eyes, the man quickly lowered the book, feigning intense concentration. Michael dismissed it as paranoia. He was deep into a mystery, after all, and his mind was probably conjuring shadows, but the feeling persisted. He gathered his notes, returned the microfiche, and thanked Mrs. Henderson, who gave him a knowing smile. "Sometimes," she said, her voice a soft whisper, "the past doesn't like to stay buried." Her words sent a shiver down his spine. As he walked out of the library, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows, he glanced over his shoulder. And there he was, the man from the library, now getting into a dark sedan parked a little way down the street. Michael quickened his pace, his heart thumping. He got into his own car, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot. A few blocks later, glancing in his rearview mirror, he saw the dark sedan a comfortable distance behind him. It stayed there, turning when he turned, maintaining the same gap. This wasn't paranoia. Someone was following him. Someone knew he was digging. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just investigating a family secret, he was trespassing on dangerous ground. Back home, the cryptic note from Arthur's statement felt even more significant. 7 Delta. Sarah Jenkins. March 17, 1989. He remembered the stylized bird symbol. It wasn't just a random squiggle. He'd seen it before somewhere, perhaps in one of Arthur's old books on heraldry or antique coins. He started to meticulously go through Arthur's extensive collection of old books, feeling an urgency he hadn't known before. It took him another hour, but he found it. Tucked away in a small leather-bound volume on ancient Roman artifacts, pressed between 2 pages, was an old photograph. It was faded, black and white, depicting Arthur in his younger years, standing beside another man Michael didn't recognize, both smiling broadly in front of a building that looked vaguely like a bank. But it wasn't the bank he knew. And in Arthur's hands in the photograph was a small ornate key. A key with the exact same stylized bird symbol etched into its bow. Below the photo, written in Arthur's hand, was a single word: Sentinel. Michael looked around his grandfather's study, his eyes darting from the photograph to the old wooden desk. He remembered a peculiar, almost invisible seam on the underside of the desk's largest drawer. He'd noticed it once, years ago, but had dismissed it as a manufacturing flaw. Now his fingers traced the seam, finding a tiny, almost imperceptible latch. With a click, a false bottom swung open. Inside, nestled on a velvet lining, was a key. It wasn't the simple modern key to box 731 he'd inherited. This key was old, heavy, made of tarnished brass with an elaborate, almost medieval design. And etched into its bow, unmistakable and identical to the photograph, was the stylized bird symbol. This was the key Arthur held in the photo. This was the key from the note. This was the key to Sentinel. But what was Sentinel? And where did this key belong? The safe deposit box that shouldn't exist was no longer just a mystery. It was a gateway to something far more intricate, far more dangerous, and Michael had just found the real key. Michael stared at the small metallic object in his palm. The weight of it felt different, heavier than the flimsy stamped metal of the original key. This was solid, expertly crafted, a tool designed for a specific purpose, a specific lock. And etched onto its head, barely visible unless you caught it in the right light, were those 7 letters. What was Sentinel? It wasn't a bank Michael had ever heard of. He pulled out his phone, his fingers already flying across the screen. Sentinel Bank, he typed, then Sentinel safe deposit boxes, Sentinel vaults. Page after page loaded, but none of them matched. There were Sentinel security companies, Sentinel financial advisors, even a Sentinel brand of home alarm systems, but nothing, absolutely nothing, that suggested a secure storage facility or a banking institution. It was as if the name in this context simply didn't exist in the public record. He flipped the key over and over, examining every curve, every groove. It was an older design, not a modern electronic card or a laser-cut key, but a traditional, intricate mechanism. There were no numbers on it, no branch codes, no obvious identifiers beyond the mysterious name. It was just the key, the real key. A cold dread began to seep into Michael's bones. His grandmother, Eleanor, had always been a woman of quiet routine, a creature of habit. The idea of her being involved in something so clandestine, so utterly off the grid, was unsettling. What kind of secret required such elaborate concealment? And why had she chosen him to find it? He tried a different tack. What if Sentinel wasn't a bank name but something else entirely? A code name? A type of service? He searched for private, high-security vaults, exclusive safe deposit box services. The results were mostly for ultra-wealthy individuals, offshore accounts, or specialized art storage. None of them mentioned Sentinel. He looked around his own apartment, the space suddenly feeling too small, too ordinary for the enormity of the secret he was holding. He walked over to the small table where he'd laid out his grandmother's belongings, the old photographs, the worn leather-bound address book, the small collection of foreign coins. He picked up the address book, flipping through the familiar names. Old friends, distant relatives, the local baker. Nothing jumped out, no cryptic notes, no unusual entries. He remembered the feeling of the empty safe deposit box, the hollow echo of expectation. Now, with this new key, that emptiness felt less like a dead end and more like a deliberate misdirection. Eleanor hadn't just forgotten about a box. She had intended for him to find that empty box, to be perplexed by it, and then eventually to find this. But why the delay? Why the elaborate scavenger hunt? He went back to his grandmother's apartment, the one he was still clearing out. He'd already gone through most of her things, but now he looked with new eyes, eyes trained to spot the hidden, the unusual. He pulled out drawers he'd already emptied, ran his hands along the undersides of shelves, peered behind picture frames. Hours passed. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long purple shadows across the room. Michael felt a growing frustration, a sense of being perpetually one step behind. He was looking for a needle in a haystack, and he wasn't even sure what the needle looked like. Then in Eleanor's study, a room filled with books and meticulously organized files, he noticed something. A small antique writing desk, its surface polished smooth from years of use, had a slightly uneven leg. He'd noticed it before, dismissed it as old house charm. But now he knelt down, running his hand along the underside of the desk. His fingers brushed against something rough, something that felt like a tiny, almost imperceptible latch. He pressed it. With a soft click, a narrow, shallow drawer, no wider than his hand, slid out from beneath the desktop. It was so well hidden, so cleverly integrated into the desk's design, that it was nearly invisible. Inside lay a single item, a small leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth with age, its pages filled with elegant, looping handwriting. It wasn't a diary. It was more like a ledger, a record of various transactions and notes, most of them mundane: paid electric bill, dentist appointment, buy flour. But scattered among these ordinary entries were others that sent a shiver down Michael's spine. He flipped through the pages, his heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against his ribs. His grandmother's life, a life he thought he knew, was suddenly unfolding in cryptic fragments. Then he saw it. An entry, dated nearly 15 years ago, stood out like a beacon. Sentinel Box 713 Main Street Branch. Michael froze. Main Street Branch. That was it. That was the bank. The very same bank where his grandmother had held the empty safe deposit box, number 404. He reread the entry, his mind racing. Box 713, not 404. And Sentinel. It wasn't a name of a bank, but a designation, a label, a code. It was a specific box within a specific branch identified by a name that meant nothing to the outside world but everything to Eleanor. His grandmother hadn't just had an empty safe deposit box. She'd had two, or rather one empty one, meant to be found first, and another hidden one, designated as Sentinel. Why the elaborate deception? Why the two boxes, one a decoy, the other the true prize? The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a forgotten family heirloom. This was a secret, carefully guarded, meticulously planned. Michael looked at the key in his hand, then back at the journal entry. The key with Sentinel etched on it. The journal entry with Sentinel box 713. It all fit. The pieces were finally locking into place, forming a picture that was far more complex, far more unsettling than he could have ever imagined. He had the real key. He had the box number. And he had the name Sentinel, which now, instead of being a mystery, felt like a password, a secret handshake. But what would happen when he presented this key, this name, this number to the bank? Would they even acknowledge its existence? Would they look at him with suspicion, or worse, with recognition? The feeling of dread intensified, twisting into a knot in his stomach. He wasn't just solving a puzzle anymore. He was stepping into a world his grandmother had deliberately kept hidden. A world that was clearly dangerous enough to warrant such extreme secrecy. What kind of secrets were locked away in box 713, under the silent watch of Sentinel? And what kind of person would his quiet, unassuming grandmother have to be to possess them? He gripped the key tightly, its cold metal a stark reminder of the gravity of his discovery. He knew what he had to do next. He had to go back to the Main Street branch. But this time he wasn't looking for answers to a simple mystery. He was preparing to unlock a truth that might shatter everything he thought he knew. And he had a terrifying feeling that once he opened that box, there would be no going back. He pushed through the heavy glass doors of the First National Bank on Elm Street, the same branch he'd visited countless times. Yet this time, every step felt like a pilgrimage into the unknown. The familiar scent of polished wood and old money, usually comforting, now carried an undertone of something stale, something hidden. The air conditioning hummed with an almost unsettling quiet, and the muffled clatter of keyboards from behind the teller windows seemed to echo in the vast, high-ceilinged lobby. Michael's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He carried the weight of expectation, the burden of a mystery that had grown far too large, and the chilling premonition that whatever lay within safe deposit box 713 would irrevocably change his understanding of reality. He approached the customer service desk, his hand instinctively tightening around the cold, heavy metal key in his pocket. A woman with neatly tied-back brown hair and a polite, practiced smile looked up. Her name tag read, Sarah Jenkins, branch manager. He'd seen her before, a fleeting, anonymous face in the banking landscape of his life. Today she was his gatekeeper. "Good morning," she greeted, her voice calm and professional. "How can I help you?" "Good morning, Sarah," Michael replied, trying to keep his voice steady. He pulled out his driver's license, the official letter from the package, and the key. "I'm Michael Thompson. I'm here to access safe deposit box 713. He pushed the documents across the polished counter. Sarah's eyebrows lifted slightly as she took the letter. Her smile faltered just a fraction as she read the unusual wording, the formal, almost archaic language that designated him as the sole authorized individual. She glanced from the letter to his ID, then back to the key, her gaze lingering on its antique design. "Box 713?" she repeated, a hint of questioning in her tone. She typed something into her computer, her brow furrowing slightly. "Mr. Thompson, I'm showing that box 713 has been inactive for an exceptionally long time. And according to our digital records, it was marked permanently closed more than 30 years ago. There's no current leaseholder associated with it." A cold wave washed over Michael. Permanently closed? This was exactly what he'd feared. The box shouldn't exist, not anymore. His carefully constructed plan, his desperate hope for answers, threatened to crumble. "Inactive," he pressed, his voice sharper than he intended. "But I have the key. And this letter clearly states my authorization." He pointed to the official-looking seal at the bottom of the document. Sarah picked up the letter again, her expression shifting from mild confusion to a more serious, almost concerned scrutiny. She held it closer, then tapped a finger thoughtfully against her chin. This letter. It's certainly legitimate in its appearance, but the information about the box itself doesn't align with our current system. Let me just check the archived physical records. Sometimes, older accounts aren't fully digitized. She gave him another polite but searching look. Please have a seat. This might take a moment. Michael nodded, his throat tight. He moved to one of the plush, unoccupied chairs, the soft leather offering no comfort against the knot of anxiety in his stomach. Every tick of the large, ornate wall clock felt like an eternity. He watched Sarah disappear into a back office, a sense of unreality settling over him. Could it be a mistake? Was this all a cruel, elaborate hoax? No, the key felt too real, the letter too specific, the mystery too persistent. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 10 minutes, Sarah reappeared, a thick, leather-bound ledger clutched in her hand. Her expression was now a mixture of bewilderment and a reluctant acceptance. You're right, Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice softer now, almost hushed. According to this ledger, dating back to the late 1960s, Box 713 was indeed leased under a unique lifetime agreement. The terms were unusual. It was indeed marked as permanently closed in our digital system, because its original terms dictated that it would remain active as long as the original signatory, or their designated successor, held the key. It seems the digital conversion simply marked it as closed when the original signatory passed, without fully accounting for the successor clause. She looked at the key in his hand, a new respect in her eyes. It appears you are the designated successor. A tense breath escaped Michael. He was in. The impossible box, the one that shouldn't exist, was real. Very well, Sarah continued, her professional demeanor returning, though tinged with a new curiosity. If you'll follow me, Mr. Thompson. She led him past a series of cubicles, then down a short, carpeted hallway that ended in a massive, imposing steel door, dull and gray, secured by a formidable combination lock and an even more formidable bolt mechanism. This was the vault. The air grew noticeably cooler, the silence more profound. The scent of ozone and old metal hung heavy. Sarah produced a large brass key from her own lanyard, inserted it into a lock beside the combination dial, and then, after a series of precise turns and clicks, she heaved the enormous steel wheel. With a deep, resonant thunk that vibrated through the floor, the heavy door swung inward, revealing a cavernous space beyond. The vault was a sight to behold, a testament to an earlier era of security. Rows upon rows of metal safe deposit boxes, stacked from floor to ceiling, glinted under the sparse, utilitarian lights. Each box was a silent promise of secrets, of fortunes, of forgotten histories. The air was dry, still, and held the faint metallic tang of aged paper and contained air. Sarah walked confidently between the aisles, her footsteps echoing. Michael followed, his gaze sweeping over the numbered boxes, each one a tiny, impenetrable fortress. He felt a profound sense of stepping into a hidden repository, a place where time itself seemed to slow, where the past was meticulously preserved. Box 713, Sarah announced, stopping before a box located in the middle row, slightly higher than eye level. It looked identical to all the others, a simple rectangular metal drawer with a small circular keyhole. But to Michael it felt different, charged with an almost palpable energy. He reached into his pocket, his fingers trembling slightly as they closed around the antique key. It felt surprisingly warm in his palm, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Sarah inserted her own master key into the lock, turning it with a decisive click. Then she gestured for Michael to use his. He slid the old key into the slot. It fit perfectly, a smooth, satisfying insertion that felt predestined. He turned it slowly, hearing a soft internal snick. The lock was open. Sarah, with a professional nod, took a step back, giving him space. You can open it now, Mr. Thompson. Michael gripped the small, brass handle on the front of the box. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it, the culmination of weeks of unsettling discoveries, of sleepless nights, of a growing sense of unease. He pulled. The metal drawer slid out with a soft, grating whisper, revealing its contents. Michael leaned in, his eyes scanning the interior, expecting, he didn't know what. Money? Jewels? An ancient will? Instead, the box contained only two items, resting on a velvet lining that had long since lost its plushness. The first was a small, leather-bound journal, no larger than his palm, its cover worn smooth with age. It had no title, no distinguishing marks, just the dark aged leather. Its pages, when he carefully thumbed them, were yellowed and brittle, filled with dense, meticulous handwriting in faded brown ink. It wasn't a diary, not in the traditional sense. It appeared to be a log, a record of dates, locations, and cryptic observations. He saw strange symbols interspersed with the text, alongside what looked like diagrams or schematics he couldn't immediately decipher. It felt old, incredibly old, like a relic from another time. Tucked between the pages of the journal, almost like a bookmark, was the second item. A single faded black and white photograph. It was a snapshot, perhaps 3 by 5 inches, curled slightly at the edges. It depicted a group of 5 individuals, 3 men and 2 women, standing stiffly in front of what appeared to be an old, derelict building. The building itself was nondescript, a brick structure with boarded-up windows, perhaps an abandoned factory or a forgotten warehouse. The people in the photo were dressed in clothing that suggested the mid-20th century, their faces serious, almost solemn. They looked like they were part of something important, something secret. Michael's gaze was drawn to one of the women in the photograph. She stood slightly to the left of the group, her arms crossed, her expression intense, almost defiant. Her eyes, even in the faded black and white, seemed to bore into him. There was something about her, something unsettlingly familiar, a flicker of recognition he couldn't quite grasp. He felt a strange jolt, a phantom echo in his memory. He carefully picked up the photograph, his thumb brushing over the woman's face. It was a sense of déjà vu, but stronger, more insistent. Where had he seen her before? Or someone like her? His mind raced, searching for a connection, a link in the chain of his own life. This wasn't a family heirloom, not a simple secret. This was something far more profound, a piece of a puzzle he hadn't even known existed until now. As he stared at the worn photograph, a minute detail in the background finally caught his eye, almost hidden by the shadows and the fading image. Above the abandoned building, just barely visible against a cloudy sky, was a distinctive, ornate iron gate. It was unlike any modern gate, with intricate swirling patterns forged into the metal, topped by 2 small, almost whimsical gargoyles. And Michael knew that gate. He had walked past it countless times in his life, barely noticing it, dismissing it as just another piece of old urban architecture. It guarded the entrance to a forgotten, overgrown park, tucked away behind a row of dilapidated brownstones on the very edge of his own neighborhood. A park he had never once ventured into. The safe deposit box that shouldn't exist had just pointed him directly to a place he saw every single week, a place he had always ignored. And in that instant, a cold, undeniable dread settled over him. The mystery wasn't just old. It wasn't just hidden. It was local, and it was waiting for him just around the corner. The cold, undeniable dread that settled over David wasn't just a fleeting chill. It was the icy grip of realization, tightening its hold with every beat of his heart. He reread the cryptic entry in the old bank ledger, the one he'd initially dismissed as a general location, a placeholder. It read, "Contents of Box 713, transferred to secure private estate, built on Whispering Hill, initial designation the Sentinel, EST 1912. Whispering Hill. The Sentinel. EST 1912. His mind raced, sifting through decades of local history, snippets of forgotten tales, and landmarks he passed without a second thought. Whispering Hill. It wasn't an official name anymore, but an old, almost mythical moniker for the highest point on the south side of town. A place where the wind always seemed to sigh through the ancient oaks, and where, perched atop its crest, stood an architectural anomaly. A building he knew. A building he had driven past hundreds of times, sometimes on his way to the hardware store, sometimes just taking a longer route home. A place he'd always noticed, yet never truly seen. It was the sprawling, ornate, and undeniably peculiar mansion that locals affectionately, or perhaps ominously, called the Gilded Cage. The pieces slammed together with a sickening thud. The Gilded Cage. Built in 1912. Situated on what old-timers still occasionally referred to as Whispering Hill. And its imposing fortress-like structure, with its high walls and iron gates, certainly gave the impression of a sentinel. David felt a sudden wave of nausea. The Gilded Cage wasn't just local. It was infamous in its own quiet way. Not for anything violent, but for its sheer eccentricity, its air of permanent isolation. It was a relic, a monument to a bygone era. The kind of place that sparked whispered rumors and local legends, yet somehow remained untouched by modern curiosity. Everyone knew of it, but no one really knew about it. He pushed back from his desk, the old leather chair groaning in protest. He needed to confirm this. He needed facts, not just gut feelings and half-remembered folklore. He scrambled to his computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. He started with the Gilded Cage history, then added Whispering Hill, and finally, Sentinel Mansion 1912. The internet, a boundless ocean of information, quickly began to yield its treasures. Old digitalized newspaper archives, local historical society blogs, even dusty forums dedicated to forgotten town lore. The story of the Gilded Cage began to unfold before him, a tapestry woven with ambition, eccentricity, and a thread of something deeply unsettling. The mansion was indeed built in 1912 by a man named Elias Thorne. Elias wasn't just wealthy. He was a titan of industry, a railroad magnate whose empire stretched across the state. But more importantly, he was one of the founding members and a significant shareholder of the very bank where David's Box 713 had originated. A direct, undeniable link. Thorne, the articles revealed, was a recluse, a visionary, and by all accounts intensely paranoid. He designed the Gilded Cage not just as a home, but as a fortress. Its walls were thicker than any other private residence in the region, its windows small and barred. It boasted an elaborate security system for its time, with intricate locks and hidden passages, rumored to have been inspired by medieval castles. The locals called it the Gilded Cage because despite its opulence, it felt more like a prison than a home. Thorne rarely left, and when he did, he was always accompanied by a small, stern retinue of guards. David scrolled deeper, his heart thumping against his ribs. He found an old architectural review from a 1913 regional magazine. Marveling at the mansion's unique construction, the article specifically mentioned a subterranean vault system, unparalleled in any private residence in the nation, designed to house Thorne's vast collection of rare artifacts and, ominously, personal securities. The description was vague, but the implication was clear. Elias Thorne had built his own private bank vault within his home. This was it. The secure private estate. The Sentinel. The dread intensified, now laced with a potent mix of excitement and trepidation. Why would the contents of a safe deposit box be moved from a bank vault to a private residence, even one belonging to a bank founder? And why was this transfer recorded in such a cryptic manner, almost as if it were meant to be forgotten? Then he stumbled upon something even more disturbing, an entry in a digitized local history blog from the 1990s, titled The Thorne Mystery. It wasn't a well-known story, eclipsed by more sensational local events, but it sent a shiver down David's spine. Elias Thorne, the eccentric magnate, had vanished. Not in a dramatic public way. He simply ceased to be seen. In late 1928, his staff reported him missing. The police investigation was cursory, hampered by Thorne's reclusive nature and the mansion's fortress-like design. There were no signs of forced entry, no ransom notes, no body. He simply disappeared from within his own gilded cage. The official conclusion was that he had likely fled the country, perhaps due to financial troubles or personal demons, an explanation that always felt thin, even to the local police at the time. His vast fortune, including the bank shares, was eventually inherited by a distant cousin, Sarah Thorne, who quickly sold off most of his assets and closed up the mansion, leaving it to slowly decay. Vanished. From a place designed to be impenetrable. A place that held the contents of safe deposit box 713. David felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. This wasn't just a historical curiosity anymore. This was a direct link to a man who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. A man who had locked away something so important it needed its own private subterranean vault. And that something was now linked to David's own family. The Gilded Cage had remained vacant for decades after Sarah Thorne sold it. It passed through several owners, none of whom ever truly occupied it for long. Each seemed to be unnerved by its oppressive atmosphere, its labyrinthine layout, or perhaps the lingering shadow of Elias Thorne's disappearance. Eventually, it was purchased by a reclusive developer who converted parts of it into high-end, exclusive apartments, a bold move that had been met with skepticism. But the developer, a shadowy figure named Mr. Peterson, had kept the most private and original parts of the mansion, particularly the subterranean levels, strictly off-limits to residents. He claimed they were structurally unsound or contained hazardous materials, but the rumors persisted that he was hiding something, or perhaps just preserving the mansion's original, unsettling secrets. David remembered the development. He'd seen the signs, the occasional news reports about the controversial project. The apartments were expensive, exclusive, and almost always empty. No one wanted to live in the gilded cage, no matter how gilded it was. So, the contents of Box 713 were not in some forgotten derelict structure. They were in a building that had been partially redeveloped, a place that, despite its new facade, still held its original dark heart. And it was owned by a man who seemed to deliberately keep parts of it secret. The fear was real now, a knot in his stomach. This wasn't just a quest for historical knowledge. It was a journey into a very personal, potentially dangerous mystery. Elias Thorne hadn't just stored the contents of the box. He had seemingly disappeared because of them, or at least in connection to the place where they were kept. David looked at his watch. It was late, well past midnight. He couldn't go now, but he knew he couldn't wait. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to go to the gilded cage, to find out what was hidden there, what had happened to Elias Thorne, and what connection it all had to his own family. He spent the next hour preparing. He pulled out a worn backpack, stuffing it with essentials: a powerful flashlight, spare batteries, a multi-tool, a portable charger for his phone, and a small sturdy pry bar. He even considered a personal alarm, a small device his wife, Emily, had given him for emergencies. He tucked it into his pocket. He wasn't naive enough to think this was a simple treasure hunt. The gilded cage had a history of disappearances, of secrecy, of an underlying dread that permeated its very foundations. He knew he shouldn't go alone. His rational mind screamed at him to call the police, to share his findings. But what would he tell them? That an old bank ledger, found in a forgotten safe deposit box, pointed to a mysterious transfer of contents to an old, semi-abandoned mansion with a history of a vanishing owner, and that he suspected foul play over a century later? They'd laugh him out of the station. Or worse, dismiss him and take over, sanitizing the mystery before he could even scratch the surface. This was his mystery, his family's legacy, and he felt an overwhelming, almost irrational need to uncover it himself. He would go at dawn. The earliest light would offer some sense of security, some visibility, while still maintaining the quiet solitude he needed. He would approach from the south, through the overgrown woods that still clung to Whispering Hill, hoping to find an overlooked entry point, something the new developers might have missed. As the first sliver of false dawn began to paint the sky outside his window in hues of deep indigo and soft gray, David slipped out of his house. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. His shadow stretched long and distorted behind him as he walked towards his car. The town was still asleep, oblivious to the ancient secrets stirring beneath its surface. He drove in silence, the quiet hum of the engine a stark contrast to the frantic beat of his heart. Every turn of the wheel brought him closer to the south side, closer to Whispering Hill, closer to the imposing silent structure that awaited him. The gilded cage. It stood like a dark silhouette against the burgeoning light, a monument to a forgotten era, a silent witness to a century of secrets. And now David was heading straight for it, drawn by an irresistible, terrifying pull, ready to confront the mystery that had been waiting for him, just around the corner, all his life. His heart pounded a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a drumbeat of destiny echoing in his ears as he finally stood before it. The old First National Bank building loomed, a relic of a bygone era, its grand neoclassical facade a stark contrast to the sleek modern glass towers surrounding it. Moss clung to the ancient stone, and ivy snaked its way up ornate columns, as if nature itself was trying to reclaim this forgotten monument. The brass plaque by the heavy oak doors was tarnished, its once gleaming letters now a muted, oxidized green, spelling out a name that had once signified power and permanence. A shiver, not entirely of cold, traced its way down David's spine. This wasn't just a building. It was a time capsule, a silent sentinel that had stood witness to generations of secrets, guarding them within its impenetrable walls. The air around it felt different, heavier, charged with the weight of history and untold stories. He pushed open one of the massive wooden doors, groaning faintly on ancient hinges, and stepped inside. The interior was a cathedral of quiet commerce. Sunlight filtered through tall, arched windows cast long, dusty rays across a polished marble floor. The air was cool, smelling faintly of old paper, leather, and something else. Something indefinable like forgotten dreams. High ceilings soared above, adorned with intricate plasterwork that spoke of craftsmanship long past. There were no flashing digital screens, no bustling queues, no cheerful, piped-in music. Just a profound, almost reverent silence, broken only by the soft click of his own shoes on the marble. Behind a high, polished mahogany counter, a lone figure sat, a woman with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a simple, elegant suit that seemed perfectly in keeping with the surroundings. She looked up as David approached, a small, polite smile gracing her lips, a smile that seemed to belong to another century. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper in the vast space. "How may I help you?" David felt a lump form in his throat. He cleared it, trying to keep his voice steady. "Good afternoon. My name is David Miller. I believe I have a safe deposit box here." The woman's smile faltered slightly, replaced by a flicker of polite confusion. "A safe deposit box, Mr. Miller? We do have several, of course, but most of our accounts are quite active. It's rare for new inquiries to come without prior arrangement, or for accounts that haven't been accessed in," she trailed off, her gaze sweeping around the silent, almost empty lobby, as if acknowledging the bank's own unique position in the modern world. "It's an old account," David clarified, feeling a strange mix of apprehension and urgency. "Very old. I have the key and a document. It belonged to my great-grandfather, Arthur Miller." He reached into his jacket pocket, his fingers brushing against the cold, smooth metal of the key and the crinkled edges of the yellowed paper. The woman's eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly. "Arthur Miller," she repeated, her voice thoughtful. "That name, it rings a faint bell. Please, one moment." She gestured towards a small, padded chair opposite her desk. "If you could provide the box number, or perhaps the date of opening, it would help me locate the records." David handed her the tattered document, pointing to the faded number handwritten in the corner. "Box 713. The woman, whose name tag read Emily Thompson, took the paper with a delicate touch, as if handling an ancient artifact. She peered at the number, then at the date 1923. Her expression shifted from polite curiosity to genuine intrigue. 1923, she murmured, more to herself than to David. "That's quite some time ago. Our digital records only go back so far for active accounts. For something this old, I'll need to consult our archives." She rose from her seat, her movements graceful and unhurried. "Please have a seat, Mr. Miller. This might take a few moments." David watched her go, his heart now thrumming with a nervous energy that vibrated through his entire body. He sat, the heavy silence of the bank pressing in on him. He could hear the faint, distant hum of the city outside, a stark contrast to the quiet, almost reverent atmosphere within these walls. Every tick of the ornate grandfather clock in the corner seemed to amplify his anxiety. What would Emily find? Or more terrifyingly, what if she found nothing at all? What if this entire journey, this impossible quest, led to a dead end? The thought was a cold, sharp blade to his burgeoning hope. Emily returned after what felt like an eternity, though it was likely only 10 minutes. In her hands she carried not a sleek tablet or a printout, but a massive leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed and brittle, its spine cracked with age. She laid it carefully on the counter, the thud echoing slightly in the stillness. "This is an original ledger from the 1920s, she explained, her voice tinged with a quiet awe. "It's rarely consulted these days. We keep it more as a historical artifact." But lo and behold, she ran a delicate finger down a meticulously handwritten column, her eyes scanning the elegant script. "Arthur Miller. Account opened June 12, 1923. Safe deposit box 713. And it appears it hasn't been accessed since." She paused, leaning closer, her brow furrowed. "Since November 15, 1929. David's breath hitched. 1929. The year of the Great Depression's onset. The year his great-grandfather disappeared. The connection was too precise, too chilling to be a coincidence. "And there's no record of it being closed?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Emily shook her head slowly. "No. The entry simply stops. No closure, no transfer, no indication of abandonment. It's as if the account just froze in time. We've had a few like this over the decades, accounts that predate the modern system where the original key was lost or the owner simply vanished. We've always maintained them, out of a sense of duty to our history, but it's exceptionally rare for someone to come forward with an original key and documentation after so long. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a shared sense of wonder. Mr. Miller, this is quite extraordinary. So, I can access it? David asked, the words catching in his throat. Emily smiled, a genuine warmth now replacing her initial formality. Yes, you can. As the direct descendant, and with the original key and documentation, you are entitled to access the contents of Safe Deposit Box 713. She closed the ancient ledger with a soft sigh. Follow me, please. She led him away from the main lobby, down a dimly lit corridor that felt even older, even more secluded. The air grew cooler, heavier. They stopped before a massive circular steel door, studded with rivets and gleaming with an almost intimidating power. This was the vault. It looked like something out of a classic heist movie, a testament to impregnable security. Emily inserted a large, heavy key into a lock, then spun a complex combination dial with practiced ease. A series of deep, resonant clicks echoed through the silent corridor, each one a hammer blow against David's already racing heart. With a grunt, she pushed the enormous door inward. It moved with a slow, deliberate scrape, revealing a cavernous interior filled with rows upon rows of steel boxes, stacked from floor to ceiling. The air inside was dry, metallic, and utterly still. It felt like walking into the heart of a sleeping giant. This way, Emily said, her voice now a hushed tone befitting the sanctity of the vault. She led him deeper into the labyrinth of boxes, their numbers stretching into the thousands. Each one represented a life, a secret, a fortune, or a memory locked away from the world. Finally, she stopped before a particular section, pointing to a small, unassuming box, no different from any of the others, yet to David, it felt like the most important object in the entire world. Box 713, she announced softly. She retrieved a long, thin steel rod, inserted it into a slot below the box, and with a gentle twist, the small rectangular door sprung open. With a practiced motion, she slid out a heavy, dark metal box, about the size of a shoebox, and placed it on a small wheeled cart. I'll take this to one of our private viewing rooms for you, Mr. Miller. David could only nod, his eyes fixed on the box. It was plain, unadorned, utterly nondescript. Yet within its cold, metallic shell lay a century of mystery, a lifetime of questions, and perhaps the answers he had unknowingly sought his entire life. The moment was here. The box that shouldn't exist, the box that had waited since 1929, was finally within his grasp. He gripped the heavy, ancient key in his hand, his knuckles white. The truth, whatever it was just on the other side of that lock. The lock shuddered, a faint metallic click echoing in the hushed vault. Michael felt the tumblers shift, a subtle vibration traveling up the cold brass of the key. He twisted the handle, his breath held tight in his chest. The heavy steel door of box 713 swung open with a soft, almost reverent sigh, releasing a whisper of ancient, undisturbed air. Emily, the bank manager, leaned forward slightly, her eyes wide with a mixture of professional curiosity and genuine intrigue. The security guard remained stoic, his gaze unwavering, but Michael could sense his attention was also fixed on the opening box. Inside, nestled in the dark velvet lining, were two items. They weren't what he expected. No glittering jewels, no stacks of old money. Just two simple, unassuming objects that nonetheless radiated an immense, almost palpable significance. First, a small leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth with age, the pages likely brittle with time. It looked like something from another era, a silent testament to a life lived long ago. Second, beneath the journal, a single thick envelope, sealed with a faded wax stamp depicting an unfamiliar, intricate symbol. The paper was heavy, cream-colored, and felt oddly cold to the touch. Michael reached in, his fingers trembling slightly as he first lifted the journal. It was surprisingly light, yet felt weighty with untold secrets. He could almost feel the history embedded in its pages. He then carefully retrieved the envelope, making sure not to disturb the fragile wax seal. "Anything interesting?" Emily asked, her voice hushed, breaking the silence. Michael looked at her, then back at the objects in his hands. "I'm not sure yet," he admitted, his voice a little hoarse. He couldn't possibly sift through these items here, under their watchful eyes. The gravity of the moment, the sheer anticipation, was almost overwhelming. He placed the journal and the envelope into the secure bag he'd brought, feeling a profound sense of responsibility. This wasn't just a family heirloom. This felt like a burden, a secret passed down through generations. After signing the necessary papers and enduring Emily's lingering questions about the box's strange history, Michael finally left the bank, the weight of the bag in his hand feeling heavier than lead. He drove straight home, his mind racing. The mundane world outside his car window seemed distant, unreal. All he could think about were the secrets locked within that journal and that sealed envelope. He burst through the door of his apartment, barely acknowledging Jessica, who looked up, startled, from her laptop. "You won't believe it," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. He laid the journal and envelope carefully on his coffee table. Jessica's eyes widened as she saw the ancient, weathered items. "These were inside?" she asked, her voice equally hushed. He nodded, already reaching for the journal. "I think this is Grandpa David's. It has to be." He opened the journal carefully, the leather creaking softly. The pages were a rich, aged cream, filled with elegant, looping script in dark, faded ink. The handwriting was unmistakably his grandfather's, albeit a much younger, more formal version of it. The first entry was dated October 12, 1929. Michael began to read aloud, his voice low and steady, Jessica leaning in close, her gaze fixed on the words. Asterisk, the air grows colder, not just with the coming winter, but with a creeping chill that has settled deep in my bones. I write this now not for myself but for whoever might one day find it. If you are reading this, know that I have failed to protect it, or perhaps, I have succeeded in hiding it long enough for the truth to resurface. Asterisk. Michael paused, a shiver running down his spine. He knew, he whispered. He knew someone would find this eventually. He continued reading, the words painting a vivid, unsettling picture of the past. Asterisk, it began innocently enough. My work at the bank, meticulously sifting through old ledgers, uncovered anomalies. Discrepancies in property deeds, unusual transfers of wealth, all centered around a particular tract of land on the outskirts of town, land supposedly barren, forgotten. But the old maps told a different story. They spoke of something beneath the earth, something ancient, something they had been guarding for generations. Asterisk. Jessica gasped. What something? Michael shook his head, urging her to listen. Asterisk. I started asking questions quietly at first. Too quietly, perhaps. The whispers began. Old Man Hemlock, the town's reclusive historian, warned me. He spoke of the Founders' Circle, not the benevolent benefactors history remembers, but a clandestine group, their wealth and influence woven into the very fabric of this town since its inception. They controlled everything, even the narrative of our past. Asterisk. Asterisk. Hemlock showed me fragments of ancient texts, symbols etched into stone he'd found hidden in the woods. They spoke of a nexus point, a place where energies converged, a source of incredible power that the founders believed was their birthright to control. They used the bank, my bank, to funnel funds, to purchase land under false pretenses, to silence anyone who dared to look too closely. Asterisk. Michael's eyes scanned ahead, his breath catching. Asterisk. I found it. Or rather, I found evidence of it. Buried beneath the old Miller's Mill property, now owned by the notorious Elias Thorne, a direct descendant of one of the original founders. It wasn't gold or oil or anything tangible in the way we understand wealth. It was something far more profound, something that could reshape the world for good or ill. The founders believed it was a source of limitless knowledge, perhaps even a key to manipulating reality itself. They called it the heart of the Townda. Asterisk. Jessica covered her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. This is insane. Like something out of a movie. But it's real, Michael murmured, his voice barely audible. Grandpa David wrote this. He lived through it. Asterisk. My discovery put a target on my back. I saw them, shadowy figures always watching. I heard whispers of accidents, disappearances, all tied to those who had previously dared to question the Founders' Circle. I knew I couldn't expose them directly. Their power was too entrenched, their reach too long. They owned the judges, the police, even some of the local politicians. My only recourse was to hide the truth, to bury it deep, hoping that one day, someone with the courage and the means would find it and bring it to light. Asterisk. Asterisk. This safe deposit box 713 became my last resort. I manipulated the old ledgers, removed its entry from the official records, making it a ghost, a box that shouldn't exist. Only the duplicate key entrusted to my family, and this journal held the true path to its discovery. The key is meant for my blood, the journal for their mind. If you are reading this, my descendant, know that you carry a great burden now. The Founder's Circle still exists. Their descendants still guard the secret. They will stop at nothing to protect it. Trust no one. The truth is a dangerous thing, especially when it threatens power. Asterisk. The journal entry ended there for that day. Michael looked up, his face pale. The Founder's Circle, he repeated. They're still out there. And they're still guarding the heart of the town. But who are they now? Jessica asked, her voice trembling. Elias Thorne is dead, isn't he? They're just names in a history book. Names or not, the power remains, Michael countered, his gaze falling on the sealed envelope. This must be the next piece of the puzzle. He carefully picked up the envelope, examining the wax seal. It was an intricate design, a stylized tree with roots that resembled twisting serpents and branches reaching towards a single watchful eye. It was the same symbol etched onto the inside cover of the journal, almost hidden. With a deep breath, Michael broke the ancient seal. The wax crumbled, and he gently unfolded the contents. Inside were 2 items. The first was a faded sepia photograph. It showed a group of 7 men, dressed in formal attire from the 1920s, standing in front of a grand, imposing building with neoclassical columns. David Miller was among them, younger but unmistakably him, standing slightly to the side, a cautious look in his eyes. In the center stood a stern-faced man with piercing eyes, Elias Thorne, Michael recognized from Old Town archives. But it was the other faces that startled Michael. One man looked strikingly familiar, an uncanny resemblance to a prominent, living figure in their town. The second item was a small, tarnished silver medallion. On one side, it bore the same intricate tree and eye symbol as the wax seal. On the reverse, however, were engraved a series of coordinates: 41.2783 degrees north, 73.1895 degrees west, and beneath them a single word, Nexus. Michael's blood ran cold as he stared at the coordinates. He instantly recognized them, not precisely but generally. They pointed to the precise location of the old Miller's Mill property, now a wooded, overgrown area that had been recently purchased by a mysterious holding company. But it was the face in the photograph that truly froze him. The man standing next to Elias Thorne, a younger version, but undeniably the spitting image of their current mayor, Robert Caldwell. The same piercing eyes, the same sharp jawline. It was impossible. Caldwell was a pillar of the community, a descendant of one of the town's founding families, yes, but revered. Michael felt a sudden, sickening lurch in his stomach. The Founder's Circle wasn't just a historical footnote. They were still here, still powerful, still operating in the shadows. And one of them, perhaps their leader, was the very man who governed their town. As if on cue, a faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound came from his apartment door. It wasn't a knock, more like something being dragged lightly across the wood. Then a soft, rhythmic tap, tap, tap. Michael and Jessica froze, their eyes locking, the journal and the photograph lying open between them. The sound stopped. Faintly from just outside, Michael heard a voice, a low guttural whisper, too indistinct to make out words. It was followed by a chilling, deliberate click, the sound of his doorknob slowly, silently turning. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs. He didn't just hear it. He felt it, a cold tremor that ran through the floorboards. He instinctively shoved Emily harder into the closet, pressing himself against the back wall, his hand scrambling for something, anything, a weapon. His fingers closed around the heavy base of a metal lamp. It was flimsy, but it was something. The door to the apartment didn't just open. It eased inward, a slow, deliberate creak that seemed to stretch for an eternity. A sliver of hallway light cut through the darkness of the living room, revealing a tall, broad silhouette. The figure stepped inside, moving with a predatory silence, their form obscured by the low light filtering in from the street lamps below. Michael held his breath, the lamp base a cold, heavy comfort in his sweating palm. Emily was completely still beside him, her rapid, shallow breathing the only sound he could discern over the frantic pounding of his own heart. The intruder wasn't calling out, wasn't announcing themselves. They were searching. A beam of light, thin and focused, cut through the room. A flashlight. It swept across the bookshelves, the coffee table, the overturned chair. It lingered for a moment on the scattered papers from their earlier research, then moved on. Michael squeezed his eyes shut for a split second, praying they hadn't left anything obvious near the closet. The light moved closer. Michael could hear the faint scuff of shoes on his hardwood floor. He could smell a faint metallic scent like old iron or maybe blood. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air snaked down his spine. This wasn't a random break-in. This was targeted. The light stopped just outside the closet door. Michael braced himself, every muscle in his body coiled. He could feel Emily's arm trembling against his. He was ready to swing, to scream, to do anything to protect them both. A low chuckle, dry and humorless, seemed to vibrate through the thin wood of the closet door. "You're not very good at hide and seek, Michael." It was a man's voice, raspy, unfamiliar. Yet it spoke his name with a chilling familiarity. The implication was clear. They knew who he was. They knew he was here. The doorknob of the closet began to turn. Michael didn't think. He reacted. With a guttural roar, he burst from the closet, swinging the lamp base in a wide, desperate arc. The metal connected with something hard, a grunt, a sharp crack. The flashlight clattered to the floor, plunging the immediate area into near darkness, save for the weak light from the hallway. He didn't wait. He grabbed Emily's hand. "Run!" They stumbled out of the apartment, past the figure who was now doubled over, groaning. Michael didn't look back. The hallway was dimly lit. They ran for the stairwell, not daring to wait for the elevator. Down, flight after flight, their footsteps echoing loudly in the silent building. He heard a crash from his apartment, then a shout. "They're getting away! Block the exits!" Panic intensified. This wasn't just one person. This was an organized operation. They burst onto the ground floor, heartbeats thrumming in their ears. The main entrance was blocked by another figure, a burly man in a dark suit, already moving to intercept them. Michael swerved, pulling Emily towards the back exit, the one that led to the alleyway behind the building. The alley was dark, a maze of dumpsters and overflowing trash bins. They scrambled over a low wall, landing awkwardly on the other side. Michael pulled Emily up, her breath ragged. They didn't stop, running blindly through the labyrinthine backstreets, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter, then disappearing altogether. Finally, they collapsed behind a large industrial dumpster, gasping for air, their lungs burning. The cold night air was a shock to their systems. What was that?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Michael managed, still struggling to catch his breath. "But they knew my name. They were waiting for us." He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking. No time to call the police. Who would he even explain this to? "Someone tried to break into my apartment because of a safe deposit box that shouldn't exist? They think he was crazy. We need to get somewhere safe," Emily said, her voice gaining a hint of resolve despite the fear. "Somewhere they won't expect." Michael nodded, his mind racing. Where? His apartment was compromised. Emily's apartment was probably next. Friends? Family? No, that would put them in danger. "The bank," he suddenly said. "The one where the box is. It's safe, secure. And it's where we need to go next anyway." Emily looked at him, her eyes wide. "Are you serious? Go back to the source of all this." "Think about it," Michael argued, rubbing the throbbing knuckles on his hand. "They know we have the key. They know we're trying to get to the box. They'll expect us to run and hide. But if we go straight there, maybe we can get ahead of them. Besides, a bank vault is probably the safest place in the city right now." It was a desperate plan born of adrenaline and fear, but it made a twisted kind of sense. The bank opened in a few hours. They just needed to survive until then. "Okay," Emily agreed, her voice firmer. "But how do we get there? We can't just walk around." "We need a disguise," Michael said, looking around the grimy alley. "And a way to get across town without being seen." They found an abandoned work uniform in a dumpster, grimy overalls, and a faded baseball cap. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Michael put on the overalls, pulling the cap low over his face. Emily found a discarded scarf and wrapped it around her hair, pulling it down to obscure her features. They walked, keeping to the shadows, avoiding main streets. Every flickering street lamp, every distant siren, sent a jolt of fear through them. They were hunted. This was no longer a puzzle. It was a battle for survival. As they walked, Michael's mind replayed the events of the evening. The sound in the wall, the whisper, the click, the intruder, his name. How did they know my name? He muttered. They must have been watching you, Emily replied, her voice low. Maybe since you first started asking questions about David, or maybe even before, when you found the key. The key, Michael repeated. It was in the book David left me. What if it was a trap? What if he wanted me to find it? Why would he do that? Emily asked, a frown creasing her brow. I don't know, Michael admitted. But David was scared. He went into hiding. Maybe he knew he was being watched, and he left the key as a kind of breadcrumb trail. Not for them, but for someone he trusted. For me. He thought about the cryptic messages, the way David had been so evasive. It all pointed to something far deeper and more dangerous than a simple family secret. This organization, Emily said, they must be incredibly powerful. To have people watching you, breaking into your home, blocking exits. And they don't want anyone knowing about this safe deposit box, Michael added. Which means whatever is inside, it's not just valuable. It's dangerous to them. They walked in silence for a while, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. The city was slowly stirring to life around them, oblivious to the desperate chase that had just unfolded. Finally, they reached a busier part of town, near a bus stop. It was still early, but a few people were already waiting. They blended in as best they could, two tired, early morning commuters. On the bus, crammed between sleepy passengers, they felt a fragile sense of safety. Michael pulled out the small, worn notebook he always carried. He flipped to a blank page. Let's list everything we know, he whispered to Emily. From the beginning. Emily nodded. Okay. David disappeared. He left you a key and a book. The key is for a safe deposit box at the First National Bank on Elm Street, Michael continued. The box is registered under a false name, Daniel Hayes, and seems to have no record of ever being opened or existing, according to the manager, Mr. Henderson. Except it does exist, Emily interjected, and Mr. Henderson seemed very nervous about it, like he knew something he shouldn't. Exactly, Michael agreed. Then there's Sarah, David's sister. She warned me off, then she disappeared too. Her apartment was ransacked just like mine. And the cryptic messages in the book, Emily added. The truth lies where shadows meet light. The architect of lies builds from within. The Phantom's legacy is etched in stone. And Operation Chimera, Michael said, remembering the hidden text. That's what this is all about, isn't it? The organization. They're trying to cover up Operation Chimera. But what is it? Emily asked, her voice hushed. And what does it have to do with the safe deposit box? Michael stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. I keep coming back to the name Chimera. In mythology, a chimera is a monstrous creature made of parts of different animals. A hybrid. A fabrication. So, a fabricated operation? Emily mused. A secret project? What kind of project would need that much secrecy and involve a bank and David and Sarah? And why would David leave the key for me? Michael pondered, tapping his pen against the notebook. He must have known he was in danger. He must have known he couldn't trust anyone else with it. Maybe he wanted the truth exposed. Maybe the safe deposit box contains the proof of Operation Chimera. Proof of what? Emily pressed. Something illegal? Something unethical? A conspiracy? Something big enough to make people disappear, to send intruders into my home, Michael replied, his jaw tight. Something that threatens fundamental trust. And if the architect builds from within, it implies someone high up. Someone who should be trustworthy. He thought about the bank itself, its old, imposing structure. The manager, Mr. Henderson, his obvious discomfort. The idea of a phantom legacy etched in stone. The bank, Michael said, a sudden realization dawning on him. It's not just a place to store the box. It's part of it. The architect of lies builds from within. What if it's not just about the organization but a specific location? A building? A foundation? Emily's eyes widened. The bank's foundation? Are you saying the bank itself is involved in Operation Chimera? Or that the bank is a front? Michael suggested, a new wave of dread washing over him. A carefully constructed facade for something far more sinister. Think about it. A safe deposit box that doesn't officially exist, managed by a terrified man, in an old, supposedly secure institution. He suddenly remembered something David had said years ago when they were kids joking about secrets. David had pointed to the old First National Bank building downtown and said, "That place always seemed like it was hiding something. All those secrets locked up." At the time, Michael had just laughed. Now it felt like a chilling premonition. "The Phantom's legacy is etched in stone," Michael whispered, connecting the dots. What if the stone isn't just a metaphor? What if it's literally the stone of the bank building itself? What if there's something in the bank, beyond the vault, that's part of this legacy? The bus pulled up to their stop. They got off, feeling a renewed sense of urgency. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky with streaks of orange and purple. Morning was here. They walked towards the imposing stone edifice of the First National Bank. It looked solid, unyielding, a bastion of trust and security. But now, in Michael's eyes, it seemed to pulse with a hidden, dangerous energy. It wasn't just a bank. It was a monument to a lie, a tomb for a secret. As they approached the grand entrance, Michael's gaze fell upon a plaque embedded in the stone foundation near the main steps. It was old, weathered, commemorating the bank's original construction. He leaned in, squinting at the faded inscription. His blood ran cold. Etched into the stone, below the date of construction and the names of the original founders, were 3 words almost obscured by time and grime. Project Chimera initiated. Etched into the stone, below the date of construction and the names of the original founders, were 3 words almost obscured by time and grime. Project Chimera initiated. Michael felt the blood drain from his face, a cold dread seeping into his bones. Chimera, the mythical beast, a monstrous hybrid, part lion, part goat, part serpent. Something unnatural. Something cobbled together from disparate parts. And it was initiated here, at the very foundation of the bank, decades ago. This wasn't just a quirky historical detail. This was a direct, chilling link to everything he'd uncovered. The impossible safe deposit box. The data anomaly that defied logic. Sarah's disappearance. Mr. Henderson's desperate warnings. It all coalesced into a single terrifying concept. He backed away slowly from the cornerstone, his mind reeling. This wasn't a modern hack or a recent scheme. This was something woven into the very fabric of the institution. A secret as old as the building itself. The bank wasn't just a financial entity. It was a front, a shell for something else entirely. Project Chimera. What could it be? A financial experiment so radical it needed to be hidden for generations? A technological marvel that mimicked life? Or something far more sinister? Something that used the bank's vast resources and its impenetrable privacy to conduct an operation that defied ethical boundaries? The anomaly. The way the numbers existed in a state of impossible equilibrium, neither truly adding nor subtracting, but simply being in a separate dimension of calculation. Was that the chimera, a hybrid financial system, a shadow economy operating within the legitimate one? Or was it something more esoteric, something that defied even the laws of physics, a bridge between realities? He had to get out of there, had to process this. He carefully, silently replaced the stone panel. The click of it settling back into place echoed like a gunshot in the silent, ancient vault. He moved with a newfound urgency, retracing his steps through the hidden passageway, the air thick with dust and the weight of untold secrets. He emerged back into the familiar, sterile bank corridor, the fluorescent light suddenly harsh and artificial after the gloom of the vault. His heart hammered against his ribs. He felt exposed, vulnerable. He was no longer just an auditor chasing a discrepancy. He was an unwitting participant in a decades-old mystery, a target for whatever or whoever was protecting Project Chimera. He returned to his office, his movements precise, almost robotic. He forced himself to review mundane spreadsheets, to answer emails, to project an air of normalcy. But beneath the surface, his mind raced, connecting dots he never knew existed. He left the bank that evening with a profound sense of unease. Every casual glance from a colleague, every security camera he passed, felt charged with hidden meaning. He imagined eyes on him, assessing, wondering if he knew too much. He walked briskly through the bustling city streets, the anonymity of the crowd both a comfort and a stark reminder of how alone he was in this. Back in his apartment, the silence was deafening. He poured himself a glass of water, his hands trembling slightly. He pulled out his laptop, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Where to even begin? Project Chimera. He typed it into a search engine, adding bank, finance, history, New York, founding. He scrolled through page after page of results, each one more irrelevant than the last. mythological creatures, pharmaceutical companies, environmental initiatives, even a defunct indie band. Nothing. Absolutely nothing related to a bank, or anything covert, or anything that remotely resembled the terrifying implications of the cornerstone inscription. The absence of information was almost as chilling as the inscription itself. It meant the project was either so well hidden, so deeply buried, that no public record existed, or it was so obscure, so niche that only those directly involved would ever know of it. This wasn't some grand conspiracy theory. This was a meticulously crafted secret, protected by layers of silence and misdirection. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. If it wasn't online, it had to be internal. It had to be within the bank's own archives, its darkest corners of historical data. He thought back to the blueprints of the vault, the impossible geometry, the strange, almost alien design. What if Chimera wasn't just a name but a description of its function? A hybrid system, a crossing of boundaries. He remembered Sarah. She had been so meticulous, so focused on the data. Had she stumbled upon something similar? Was that why she vanished? And Mr. Henderson, the old man in the assisted living facility, his fragmented warnings about the numbers and the truth being hidden. He had been trying to tell Michael about Project Chimera, without ever using the name. The thought solidified into a plan, daring and dangerous. He had to go back. Not during the day where every move was monitored, but at night. He needed to access the bank's historical digital archives, the deep repositories of corporate memory that weren't publicly available. He knew the layout, the security protocols, the blind spots. He was an insider, which gave him an edge, but also meant the stakes were astronomically high. If he was caught, his career, his freedom, perhaps even his life would be over. But the alternative, living with this gnawing uncertainty, knowing this monstrous secret was festering beneath the city, was unbearable. He had to know. He waited until the city truly slept, the late-night traffic a distant hum. Dressed in dark clothing, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, he made his way back to the imposing marble facade of the bank. The building loomed, a silent titan under the glow of streetlights, its windows dark, its secrets held tight within its walls. He used his employee ID, the magnetic stripe, a gateway to the unknown. The first door clicked open with a soft thud, echoing in the cavernous lobby. He moved stealthily, his senses heightened, every shadow a potential threat, every creak of the old building a warning. The security cameras were a network he knew intimately, and he moved through their blind spots with practiced ease, a ghost in the machine. He navigated the deserted hallways, the silence amplifying the sound of his own breathing. The air was cool, stale, tinged with the faint scent of old paper and ozone from the server rooms. He reached the executive archives, a specialized section of the IT department where the bank's most sensitive historical data was stored on secure, offline servers. It was a place few employees ever needed to access, far removed from the daily hustle. He slipped into the dimly lit server room, the gentle hum of machinery a constant, low thrum. He found a terminal, tucked away in a corner, and logged in using his credentials. He bypassed the usual interfaces, digging deeper into the archival directory structure, searching for anything unusual, anything encrypted, anything dating back to the bank's founding. Hours blurred into a tense, silent vigil. He scrolled through thousands of files, digital ghosts of transactions, mergers, internal memos. Then he saw it. A file, not labeled with a conventional name, but a series of cryptic characters. Archon_NIT_001. Its creation date perfectly matched the bank's founding year. The same year etched into the cornerstone. His breath hitched. This had to be it. He double-clicked. A surge of adrenaline coursing through him. A prompt appeared. Legacy encryption key required. He didn't have it. Frustration, sharp and bitter, washed over him. He was so close. This file, buried deep within the bank's most secure archives, was clearly the digital manifestation of Project Chimera. Archon_NIT_001. Archon, a ruler, a chief magistrate, a powerful, hidden entity. He tried a few common default keys, then historical codes related to the bank, but nothing worked. The file remained locked, a digital fortress guarding its secrets. He leaned back in the chair, staring at the screen, the name Archon_NIT_001 burning into his mind. This wasn't just old history. This was an active, protected secret. Someone had gone to extreme lengths to ensure this file could not be easily accessed, even by bank employees with high-level clearance. As he sat there contemplating his next move, a faint sound reached him from down the hallway. A soft metallic click. Then, a barely perceptible whirring sound, like a distant motor. His blood ran cold, fear gripping him in an icy vice. He wasn't alone. He slammed the laptop shut, his movements jerky, desperate. He logged out of the system, wiping any temporary files, trying to erase his digital footprint. He scrambled away from the terminal, instinctively melting into the shadows behind a towering rack of servers, his heart hammering against his ribs. The whirring sound seemed to grow closer, accompanied by the muted shuffle of footsteps. Someone else was in the bank. Someone else was moving through the darkened halls. Were they looking for him? Had they detected his presence? Or were they part of Project Chimera, tending to its secrets even in the dead of night? He held his breath, straining to hear over the frantic pounding in his ears. The footsteps paused, seemingly just outside the server room door. Then they moved on, receding back down the hallway, the whirring sound fading into the silence. Slowly, carefully, Michael eased himself out from behind the servers. He waited, listening intently for several long minutes, but the sounds didn't return. He knew he couldn't stay. He had pushed his luck far enough. He had found his lead, a name, a file, a confirmation that Project Chimera was real, and that it was actively being protected. He moved silently, swiftly, out of the server room and retraced his steps through the darkened bank, his escape now an urgent, desperate flight. He didn't stop until he was out on the street, breathing in the cool night air, the marble facade of the bank now seeming less like a building and more like a tomb, guarding a secret that was far from dead. He was out, but the chilling reality had set in. He wasn't just investigating a historical anomaly anymore. He was now caught in the crosshairs of an active living conspiracy. The cold autumn air outside the abandoned bank did little to calm Michael's racing heart, which now hammered against his ribs with a frantic, primal rhythm. He was out, but the chilling reality had set in. He wasn't just investigating a historical anomaly anymore. He was now caught in the crosshairs of an active living conspiracy. He stumbled back to his car, fumbling with the keys, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped them. The image of that massive server farm, humming with unseen power in the belly of a building that should have been dead for decades, was seared into his mind. It wasn't just a relic. It was a pulsating digital heart, beating in the chest of a forgotten titan, and he had just disturbed it. As he drove, a cold dread began to mingle with his adrenaline. He kept checking his rearview mirror, a paranoid reflex he couldn't shake. Every dark sedan, every car that seemed to linger a little too long, sent a fresh jolt of fear through him. He was no longer an anonymous seeker of forgotten history. He was a witness. He was a threat. His first impulse was to go to the police to tell them everything. But what would he say? I broke into an abandoned bank, found a secret room, and discovered a server farm that shouldn't be there. And now I think I'm in danger? They'd laugh him out of the station, or worse, detain him for trespassing. No, he needed proof. Something tangible, undeniable. And he had nothing but a few blurry photos on his phone, taken in haste and fear. He drove aimlessly for a while, the city lights blurring past him, until he found himself pulling into Jessica Street. He knew it was late, but he couldn't face this alone. He needed a clear head, a second opinion, someone who wouldn't dismiss him as a lunatic. Jessica, surprisingly, was still awake, hunched over her laptop, surrounded by scattered papers and empty coffee cups. She looked up, startled as he knocked, then her eyes widened when she saw his face. "Michael, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." He stepped inside, the words tumbling out of him in a breathless rush. He recounted everything. The hidden passage, the descent into the vault, the false wall, and finally the colossal humming server farm, bathed in an eerie blue glow. He described the sheer scale of it, the cold, calculated efficiency of the operation, the feeling that he had stumbled upon something far larger and more sinister than he could comprehend. Jessica listened, her expression shifting from skepticism to genuine alarm. She pushed her glasses up her nose, her brow furrowed in thought. A server farm? In an abandoned bank from the 1920s? That makes no sense. The power alone, the cooling systems, the infrastructure needed for something like that. It would be immense. That's what I thought, Michael exclaimed, running a hand through his hair. It's like something out of a spy movie. But it was real, Jessica. It was very real. and it felt active, like it was running, processing something right now. He pulled out his phone, showing her the grainy photos. They weren't much, but they were enough to convey the scale. See? This isn't some amateur setup. This is professional. This is funded. And it's hidden in plain sight, under a building that everyone forgot about. Jessica zoomed in on one of the photos, her fingers flying across the screen. Look at this cabling, Michael. And these racks. This is high-density computing. We're not talking about a few servers here. We're talking about a data center. What could they possibly be doing with that kind of processing power, hidden away like that? A new terrifying thought struck Michael. The safe deposit box. The one that shouldn't exist. What if it wasn't just a place to hide something? What if it was a trigger? Or a key to something far larger? Jessica's eyes narrowed. You're talking about an old analog mechanism triggering a modern digital operation? It's a stretch, but if someone wanted to hide something for decades and then activate it only when a very specific obscure condition was met, maybe. But why? That's the million-dollar question, Michael replied, pacing her small living room. I keep thinking about the bank itself. The way it was abandoned, the sudden closure, the quiet disappearance. It wasn't just a business failure, was it? It was a cover. A perfect, historical cover for something they wanted to build and operate in secret. He stopped, a chilling hypothesis forming in his mind. What if the original purpose of the safe deposit box, the real purpose, was to store the initial seed of this operation? A piece of code, a set of instructions, a key that would eventually unlock this whole digital behemoth when the time was right? And whoever owned that box, whoever set it up, was playing a very, very long game. Jessica chewed on her lip, a habit she had when deep in thought. A long game indeed. But what kind of game? Financial manipulation? Espionage? Data harvesting on an unprecedented scale? All of the above, maybe? Michael suggested, his voice barely a whisper. Think about it. The bank held people's most valuable possessions, their secrets. What if this operation, now powered by those servers, is about collecting and processing digital secrets? Or influencing outcomes? Markets, elections, public opinion. The possibilities are terrifying. Just then, Michael's phone, which he had placed on Jessica's coffee table, buzzed with an incoming message. He picked it up, expecting a late-night text from a friend. The message was from an unknown number. It contained a single chilling image, a screenshot of his own face, taken from a security camera feed, standing right in front of the abandoned bank, just hours ago. Below it, a short, stark message. Asterisk, some doors are best left unopened, Michael. Asterisk. Michael's blood ran cold. He felt a prickle of sweat on his forehead. They know, he choked out, showing the phone to Jessica. They know I was there. They've been watching me. Jessica gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's impossible. How did they get that? And so fast. They have cameras, Michael mumbled, remembering the almost invisible lenses he'd spotted near the entrance. And they're connected. This whole thing. It's not just a server farm. It's a fully integrated, active surveillance and intelligence operation. And now I'm on their radar. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just a curious historian anymore. He was an accidental intruder, a fly caught in a web spun by unseen spiders. The message was a warning, clear and unambiguous. But it also proved his theory. The operation was alive and it had teeth. We have to go to someone, Jessica insisted, her voice trembling slightly. This is beyond us, Michael. This is serious. Who, Jessica? Who can we trust? If this is as powerful as it seems, if they can monitor me and send me a message within hours of me being there, they could have people everywhere. This isn't just a local crime ring. This is organized, sophisticated, and deeply entrenched. He paused, his mind racing. No, we can't go to anyone yet. Not until we know more. Not until we have something irrefutable. He looked at the image on his phone again, his own face caught in the act. The fear was still there, but now a steely resolve began to harden his gaze. They had warned him, but warnings could also be interpreted as challenges. They think they can scare me off, Michael said, a grim determination entering his voice. They think they can make me back down, but they just confirmed everything. They confirmed that what I found is real, and that it's dangerous. And now I know they're watching, which means I have to be smarter. I have to be faster. Jessica looked at him, her concern evident. "What are you going to do, Michael? You can't just go back there." "No," he agreed, "not yet. But I have to find out what that server farm is doing, what kind of data they're processing, and for what purpose. This isn't just about a safe deposit box anymore, Jessica. This is about power, influence, and a secret operation that has been running under our noses for decades. And I think I just stumbled upon the key to unlocking it all." He picked up his laptop, his mind already formulating a plan. He had to dig deeper, but he had to do it remotely, covertly. He had to find a digital footprint, an anomaly in the vast ocean of online data that could lead him back to that hidden server farm, without putting himself in immediate physical danger. But as he began to search, a chilling thought gnawed at him. If they could send him a picture of himself, they could also be watching his every digital move. He was no longer just an investigator. He was a target, and the game, he realized with a cold certainty, had just begun. The chilling thought gnawed at him. If they could send him a picture of himself, they could also be watching his every digital move. He was no longer just an investigator. He was a target, and the game, he realized with a cold certainty, had just begun. Michael didn't hesitate. Every instinct screamed danger. His phone, his laptop, his smart speaker. They were all potential eyes and ears. He grabbed his wallet, keys, and the ornate, antique key from the safe deposit box, wrapping it in a piece of cloth and tucking it deep into his pocket. He left his apartment, not bothering to lock the door, knowing that if they wanted in, a lock wouldn't stop them. He hailed a cab, paid cash, and directed the driver to a nondescript coffee shop across town. From there, another cab, another, until he was sure his immediate trail was cold. He bought a cheap burner phone, discarding his old one in a public trash can miles away. He reached out to David not by phone, but through a prearranged, secure messaging app they'd set up for emergencies, a relic from a past, less dangerous hackathon. Michael chose a meeting spot David would understand, the quiet, forgotten corner of a university library, a place where surveillance cameras were old and easily avoidable, and where the sheer volume of people provided anonymity. David arrived looking harried. "Michael, what's going on? You sounded intense." Michael slid the burner phone across the table, showing him the picture. "They know I'm onto them. They sent me this." David's eyes widened. "That's it. Where was this taken?" "My apartment. A few hours ago. They're watching me, David. Everything. My digital footprint, my physical movements, probably my thoughts if they could figure out how." Michael's voice was low, urgent. "I need you to help me find them. Find out who they are and what Project Chimera means." David took a deep breath, the gravity of the situation settling on him. "Okay, this is way beyond anything I've ever done. But I'm in. What do you have?" Michael pulled out the ornate key. "This. It was in the safe deposit box. It's not a bank key, not a house key. It feels different." David examined the key, his brow furrowed in concentration. He pulled out a small, specialized scanner from his backpack, usually reserved for antique artifact authentication. He ran it over the key, the scanner word displaying complex patterns and almost imperceptible etchings. "This isn't just an old key, Michael," David muttered, his eyes glued to the screen. "It's a marvel of old-world craftsmanship applied to something modern. The grooves, the specific contours, they form a unique, intricate pattern. It's almost like a physical checksum, a multi-factor authentication token disguised as an antique." "A what?" Michael pressed. "A cryptographic key, Michael. Its unique physical signature, when digitally interpreted, acts as a master password. It's designed to unlock something specific, something incredibly secure, that would resist conventional brute force attacks. It's brilliant, actually. Who would ever suspect an old key?" David looked up, excitement warring with apprehension in his eyes. "And that picture they sent you? It has a nearly invisible watermark. A tiny embedded sequence of pixels that, when analyzed, points to a server. Not on the dark web, not some easily traceable IP. It's hidden behind a cascade of proxies and shell corporations, designed to look like legitimate cloud infrastructure." They spent the next 72 hours in a blur of caffeine and code. David, using Michael's burner phone and a highly secure, untraceable laptop he kept for special projects, began to peel back the layers of digital obfuscation. The server, he discovered, belonged to a vast, seemingly innocuous tech conglomerate called Omnicorp. Omnicorp specialized in predictive analytics, future-proofing solutions, and social optimization. On the surface, they were a leader in AI and data science, helping businesses and governments make smarter decisions. Beneath that surface, David found something far more disturbing. Project Chimera, David finally announced, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep, is their magnum opus. It's not just data collection, Michael. It's data manipulation. Omnicorp has developed an AI so advanced, it can model human behavior with terrifying accuracy. They don't just predict trends, they create them. They subtly influence everything. Consumer choices, political narratives, even individual life paths through targeted information, social nudges, and algorithmic suggestions that feel organic but are anything but. Michael felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. So, the safe deposit box. The key. What was its purpose? Why me? David leaned back, rubbing his temples. The key, Michael, is a master access key to a highly encrypted, defunct data vault that Omnicorp has been trying to crack for years. This vault contains the raw, unfiltered data, the internal communications, the true scope of Project Chimera, the evidence of their manipulation, their ethical breaches, their global reach. Someone wanted this exposed, Michael whispered, a new realization dawning on him. The anonymous tip to the bank, the box in my name. It wasn't Omnicorp trying to recruit me. It was someone against them. Someone who knew Omnicorp was trying to access that vault, and who knew they needed an independent mind, someone outside their system, to find this key and expose the truth. Exactly, David confirmed. The original owner of the box, the identity used to open it in your name, was likely a brilliant programmer or a disillusioned insider. Someone who saw what Chimera was becoming and tried to fight back. They hid the key, knowing Omnicorp would eventually find the box, but wouldn't understand the key's true purpose without the right context. They left a breadcrumb trail, a series of seemingly random clues, hoping someone like you would follow it. Michael gripped the ornate key. And the picture? The surveillance. A final test, David explained. Or a warning. Once you started getting close, Omnicorp knew. They wanted to see if you'd be intimidated, if you'd back down, or if you'd be a worthy adversary. They likely wanted to recruit you or silence you, but they underestimated you, Michael. They underestimated your need for answers. The full horror of it washed over Michael. His entire journey, starting with a simple administrative error, had been a meticulously crafted trap set by a ghost, all designed to bring down a global puppet master. He wasn't just an investigator anymore. He was the designated executor of a dead man's last will. We have to expose them, Michael said, his voice firm, resolute. The world needs to know. David nodded. But how? Omnicorp is everywhere. They own politicians, media, entire digital infrastructures. If we just dump it, they'll bury it, discredit us, or worse. We don't just dump it, Michael countered, a plan forming in his mind, cold and precise. We make sure it can't be buried. We hit them from every angle simultaneously. We use the key. We unlock that vault. Together, they devised a strategy, using the unique signature of the antique key. David wrote a script that would interface with the defunct vault's archaic but robust security protocols. On a designated hour from a secure, anonymous server located deep within a hidden network, Michael initiated the connection. The old key, scanned and interpreted, provided the final cryptographic sequence. There was a moment of agonizing silence, then a torrent of data began to flow. Years of internal memos, project outlines, psychological profiles of billions, algorithms designed to exploit human vulnerabilities, recordings of clandestine meetings, financial ledgers detailing illicit transactions, and explicit instructions on shaping public perception. It all poured out. Project Chimera, in all its horrifying detail, was laid bare. Michael didn't hesitate. He wasn't looking for personal glory, only justice. He and David had prepared for this. They fragmented the data, encrypted it, and then simultaneously uploaded it to dozens of independent, secure whistleblower platforms, investigative journalism outlets, and anonymous servers across the globe. They attached a concise, undeniable summary, explaining Omnicorp's reach and the insidious nature of Project Chimera. The sheer volume and irrefutable nature of the evidence, coupled with its simultaneous release, made it impossible for Omnicorp to contain. The world awoke to a new reality. The revelation sent shockwaves across continents. Omnicorp's stock plummeted, their executives were arrested, and governments scrambled to investigate the extent of their influence. The illusion of a free and unmanipulated society shattered for millions. Michael, however, found no peace. He knew this wasn't over. Omnicorp might be crippled, but the ideals and the technology behind Project Chimera wouldn't simply vanish. The forces that sought to control, to manipulate, would always exist, always adapt. He had exposed one Hydra, but others lurked in the shadows, learning from Omnicorp's mistakes. He disappeared again, this time for good. He cut all ties, creating a new, untraceable identity. He lived off-grid, always moving, always looking over his shoulder. He became a ghost, forever vigilant, forever aware of the invisible threads that sought to control humanity. He carried the ornate key with him always, not as a trophy, but as a chilling reminder. The safe deposit box that shouldn't exist had opened his eyes to a world he could never unsee. It had shown him the ultimate truth, that the fight for true freedom and privacy was an eternal one, and his part in that struggle, thanks to a single impossible key, had just begun.